1920 by 1080, however long is fine, it doesn't really matter. And so make a composition and then add a solid background to it. You should probably be able to do that. Give it a solid background. We'll lock that down. And the first thing here with paths, actually I'm just going to name this paths, that we can look at is we can animate along paths, and we can also use those paths to kind of animate a stroke along or another shape. So I'm going to start by just drawing out a path. I'm going to grab the pen tool, grab that, and just sort of draw a wavy path kind of across your screen. If it doesn't have a stroke on it right at the moment, it doesn't really matter. Just take that path. We're going to go down here into the shape layer. Open it up. And under Contents, Shape, we're going to, I don't want the fill on this path, I just want the color stroke. So I'm just going to go to the fill setting, and I'm just going to turn that off. So if I click the eyeball right next to it, that'll turn it off. And then I'm going to go up to the stroke option under Contents, and let's set the stroke width to like 20 pixels or something like that, so we can see it, and make sure we can see the line. So what color it is, I guess, probably doesn't necessarily matter. But so we've got this path, and the first thing we're going to look at is trim paths. And if I go under shape here, or actually go under contents where it says add, we can go down here most of the way down to where it says trim paths. We're going to select that. So we've just drawn a wavy line with a stroke on it, and we're going to choose trim paths, which will, underneath our shape layer, give us more options here. So if I open up the trim paths option, you'll see there's a start, there's an end, and there's an offset. And the start right now is at 0 and the end is at 100%, which basically means that my stroke is starting at point 0 on my path, and it's ending at 100% of the length. So if I go down here to end, and I just click on that and draw it back, I can pull that stroke all the way back to 0. I'll just set a keyframe for that. Go ahead 2 seconds or so, and then under end, just sort of pull that back out to 100%, and we can animate a shape along a path that way, or a stroke along a path, which has varying use by itself, and if we want to change the speed that animates along that path, we can just drag that in frame out. It'll go slower. Drag it in, and we'll set it back to 2 seconds. And I can also always modify this stroke a little bit. If I open up my stroke settings, you'll see that there's a miter limit, taper, wave, a variety of settings for that. So let's take a look at wave. Wavelength will give us kind of a different kind of shape to our stroke. Give it a very calligraphic kind of a look. Phase, sometimes some of these settings you really just need to play with, but animating your phase settings will kind of give that a bit of a sort of an oscillating effect. Taper was what I was really going to look at, though. I sidetracked myself. I can also taper that stroke. So much like Illustrator. Start width, the end width. So I could taper the end a bit. But get slightly different effects when we animate it on. That gives a little more of a calligraphic effect. We got some thicks and some thins. But trim paths kind of become useful by themselves. And sooner or later, so remember that, we looked at masks last time, and, sooner or later, like making it so that a script type writes on screen. You can use trim paths like this as a black and white, as a black stroke. You can create a mask out of that and use it to make a typeface appear or disappear. So using these trim paths, I'm just going to turn that one off. And let's see, I'm going to find a typeface. Letter S. I guess Helvetic is probably pretty simple, but so say I've got a letter that I want to actually kind of animate on screen. I'll take maybe the better one. There we go. I can use this. So I've got this kind of scripty typeface. Using my pen tool, just like I did before, but a little more detail, I can sort of trace over the stroke and let's turn off the fill so we can see what we're doing. But I'm going to go to black stroke of, I don't know, I'll set a couple of, I guess I set about 17 pixels for the size of the composition I have. All right, back to my pen tool. And I can just kind of trace over this letter. But if you remember on Monday, we looked at alpha masks, alpha channels. So this is going to be, the shape layer is going to be my mask for the letter S. So if I say just call that letter mask. I'm actually going to drop it below this character, and then switches and modes. I'm going to set that letter mask stroke as my mask. So I traced over it with a black line that was wide enough to cover the entire letter. And when I use it as a mask, and I'm going to switch it to a Luma mask. No, actually I'm going to, so with these two mask switches here, I want it to be an alpha mask, which is the first one, the black circle in the middle of the white square. The second one inverts the mask. So in order to get the effect I wanted, I had to invert the mask. And I can go back to this mask layer now, and you see I didn't get the whole thing covered with that stroke. So I can still, let's open that up, let's grab the path, and I can adjust and modify it so that I get the whole thing covered. And maybe it needs to be a little thicker. But that kind of covers everything up. So I've masked out that letter S with that stroke that I traced over top of it. And then if I open that up, go under the Add menu again, down to Trim Paths, and open that up, I'm actually going to change the end. So if I scroll back to the end, I can kind of draw that stroke on screen. So I'll just start it at like 1 second, end is set to 100, and I'll go to 2 seconds and change end to 0. I can draw, draw characters on screen that way. This has a lot of overlap, so there's a couple little things that don't really show up quite right. But if it's, if you're scripting on type, for instance, using this method, it happens fast enough that a lot of times you don't see those little imperfections. I mean, a lot of this stuff is sort of visual sleight of hand in a way. But trim paths can be used to make masks. I mean, any black and white object can be used to make a mask. Probably the Helvetica S would have been a simpler shape to use to do this, but the process works either way. So that's using a path as a trim mask. So that's kind of the first thing. We can also use paths to animate objects along a screen. So I'm going to create a new composition. Go up here to my solids, grab my blue solid and drop it in for a background color. And then I can also, then I'm just going to draw with my pen tool, I'm just going to draw sort of a infinity shape on my screen. And even that out a little bit. All right. In this particular shape, I don't really care whether it's got a fill or a stroke on it at all. Although I am going to duplicate this. I do want to keep this, a copy of this exactly as it is, and just hide it for right now because I think I want to use that again. So we can draw a path like that and use it to animate an object. And what happens is whenever we do this, the points that we put within our, the points in our path all become keyframes within our timeline. So if you draw a shape like that, and then I'm just going to go ahead and draw like a circle. Let's grab my ellipse, draw a circle, fill it with red, doesn't need to have a stroke. And then we want to make sure that we put our center point in the middle of our circle. So if we grab our center point tool, turn on snapping, drop our center point right in the middle of the circle. Because what's going to happen is I'm going to use this path to animate, but it's going to actually, the circle is going, the center point is going to animate along this path. So I've got that, and this will be my ball. And then let's grab our shape layer here, open up our contents, open up the path, select it, and I'm going to copy it. So the path selected, I'll copy it, and then I'm going to hide it because I don't need it anymore. I'm going to go into my ball shape and open up my position parameter, select that, and paste that path into the position parameter. And you'll see that it moved the ball to the endpoint. And if I scrub along this, this ball is following that path. And if I want to make this last longer, I'm just going to select all my keyframes, hold down my Option key, grab the last one, and drag it out to like 6 seconds or so. So that, I mean, did you get it? Did you do it?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, totally. Yes. Don't sound too confident in yourself.
Okay.
Look, I never sound confident, even when I know what I'm doing. That's how you see people.
So we'll animate our shape around the path like that. Did you really do it? Did you do it, or were you doing something else? Yeah. All right. So I want you to do what I just did, though. I did it once. So I'm going to step you back through it again. All right? So we're going to create a composition. And if you don't have a background color in it, just drop a background solid onto it. Pick a color. And then what I want to do is draw the path that I want to animate to. So all I'm really going to do is grab my pen tool, and we're just going to draw kind of an infinity symbol. Kind of rough. Kind of like that. And this adjust it. So I did that infinity path just so it loops, but if you just draw a simpler path, the process is going to be the same. The shape of the path doesn't so much matter at all. We could theoretically use a circle for this and copy the path out of it, but we're just going to draw a path. Again, whether it's in the center, whether it's this one or not, just as long as you've got a path. And then I'm going to deselect that, and I'm also going to grab my ellipse tool and draw a circle somewhere. And make sure that when you draw it, you put your center point right in the middle when you do it. I'll stop there for a moment. We should have a path, and we've got our circle. I want to name everything just so I know what it is. So the circle's my ball, and this shape layer is my animation path. So we're just going to use the animation path right now to create our that's going to be the path that our ball is going to follow along. So if we've got both of those, let's forget about the ball for a moment. Let's go into our animation path, open it up, open contents, open shape, open path, content, shape, path, select the path, and you'll see that all the little handlebars will light up. Select the path and just Command C on your keyboard, copy the path. So we're going to copy that, Command C. And then I don't need this again for right now, so I'm just going to hide it. And what I want to do is go up here to my ball now, open that up, and actually if I just tap P for position on my keyboard, that's what I want. Select this position, parameter, and we're going to paste that path into it. So Command V, and the ball should move to the middle of somewhere along that path. Depends on where you started drawing it. All right? So that's where mine ended up. Yours might be in a different spot. But what matters is that we've got keyframes for every point in our path that we drew. And if we hit the play button, that ball should now follow along that path. And if, and this only gives us basically that path worked out to 2 seconds worth of time. If we want to make it last longer, we just want to grab all of the keyframes. If we just, click and drag around them, then hold down the Option key and click on the last one, we can stretch that out to maybe 6 seconds. And it'll go slower. Everybody get it? Are we able to do it? Do I need to do anything again or back up? Yes? So you missed the part where which one was it again? Oh, the animation path. So did you draw the animation path? Yeah. Okay. So all you need to do is, actually, let me back up. All right. So you got your animation path. If you open the animation path, open Contents, Shape, Path, or Path 1, and then here's where it says Path. Select that path and copy it. Command C. And then you can hide that animation path because you don't really need it anymore. Go into your ball, into the position settings, select position, and paste. And like I said, with all of those selected, if you hold down your Option key and click on the last one, you can stretch the timing out on it a little bit to like 6 seconds. So if we have relatively simple kinds of shapes that we want to animate along a path, that's a good method for doing so. I mean, I put those in what would be interesting to see. If I'm going to open my scale, you can do this or not. Select scale. I'm going to paste the paths in there. Oh, okay, it won't do it. It gives me a warning. Some parameters you can actually paste your paths into and some you can't, but position always works. So now, so it starts in the middle, goes around, and ends here again. So, I mean, I've got a 35-second long animation, and if I want this to actually loop for the entire length of this animation, I don't want to have to be tedious and go back and copy and paste keyframes. So I'm going to write what's referred to in After Effects as an expression, which is a little bit of JavaScript. And you can write a lot of JavaScript in After Effects with expressions, but we're going to just focus on one or two simple little commands that are real easy. And you can write them down, but After Effects will actually help you write them too. So what I want to have happen is, I don't want my animation to stop here. I want it to keep looping throughout the course of my animation entirely. So if I come back here and select my very last keyframe and go over here back over to position where my stopwatch is, that's blue right now because I've animated along it, don't just click on the stopwatch because you'll erase your keyframes. But if you hold down your Option key and click on that keyframe or on the stopwatch, it'll open up an expression line. And we can write an expression in here. And this is a fairly simple expression, but if I'm just going to select all this type because I don't need it. But if I type loop, it's actually loop out. Loop out, you'll see that a little menu comes up and gives us that command. I'll just tap my return key, and then inside of those parentheses, I need to tell it how to loop. So I'm going to do an apostrophe or a single quote, and you'll see that it gives you a bunch of different options. And all I want to do is I'm going to cycle it. Select cycle. And now when I play my animation, if I did this right, it'll get to the end and it starts over again, and it's going to loop for the whole duration of my composition. So if I've got an hour-long composition, it's going to loop the entire hour. And the nice thing about doing it this way is, let's say we decide that that's too slow. I go back in here, I select all my keyframes again, hold down my Option key and move them. Maybe I want it to loop at 4 frames. I can speed that up very easily that way. If I'm setting keyframes all along my timeline though, and I want to modify that, it's a little more tedious process. And so there are other options on looping. So I just did cycle there. If I select that, I could try ping pong. If I choose that as an option, play it through, and when it gets to the end, it's going to go back the other way. So ping pong, like ping pong ball back and forth across the table. But that loop out expression is probably one of the most commonly used expressions in After Effects. It's certainly the most useful. It makes a repeating animation like that far easier to manage. Quite honestly, that's probably the only expression we'll ever really write, but so I've animated that ball along a path and I set up a loop for it. So that's one method of looping an object. Let's just slow it down. Change it from ping pong back to cycle. And but that'll loop for as long as my animation is. It won't stop. So again, we sort of used the path to animate the ball, but then we wrote an expression to make it loop like this. Any questions on that or anything you need to see again? I can show you how to bring up that expression again if you missed it. All right. So that's just the first time we're going to use and write an expression for this batch of things I'm going to do here. Usually when I say we're going to write JavaScript in After Effects, people get wiggy, but it's not that bad. You just got to know what the commands are. And it does actually walk you through them, so. All right. So I'm going to save this real quick. This will be looping on a path. So I've got another composition that I can take these same things I just did and apply them to this. And this is another form of looping. hide this. We can set up a moving background with a stationary object in the middle to make it look like it's kind of driving along a road. So this technique actually uses an offset effect as well as a couple of different forms of looping. But you'll see that the buildings move at a different pace. Further ones move slower than the ones in the front. And the car just kind of sits there in the middle, but he kind of bounces up and down like he's motoring along the road. So the bouncing up and down motion is also a loop out, a scripted loop. And that'll just kind of keep going. So the way this is done is, and I'll just sort of show you the parts here real quick, and then we'll actually do it. And I've got the instructions for making the loop in here. But if I look at, I've got a bunch of different compositions in here. So the first thing I did was make my skyline. And so I've got a 1920 by 1080 composition. That's the size of my finished animation. So I made a city that was twice that length. So if I open the skyline file, you'll see that it's actually 1920 times 2 by 180. And all I really did was drew a bunch of rectangles and arranged them like a city within this composition. The second thing I'll do is go back to my main. I've got these clouds. If I open the clouds composition up, it's a little different. It's just a single cloud sitting in the middle of my composition. But it's going to look as though there's a couple of clouds there sort of going through slowly in the sky in the background. And then what other part do I got? And then I've got my car, which if I open that up, I made in After Effects. It's just a bunch of overlapping circles that I then added a mask to hide, to create the flat bottom on the car. So if I grab one of these, pull it out, you'll see that that's the way I made my car, just kind of real rough. And normally I'd create these in Illustrator. That's usually what I'll do, but I did all these in After Effects just because I didn't want to jump back and forth between programs. So that's the general, those are all the parts. It's kind of simple. So in order to make this, the first thing I need you to do is I'm going to make a new composition. We're going to create a city skyline. So create a new composition. And I want you to do this. I want you to do a specific way, though. New composition. And remember, just like in Illustrator and any other Adobe app, you can place equations into the measurements fields. So what I want is my cityscape is going to be twice as long as my main 1920 by 1080 composition. So I want to make this composition 1920 times, so shift and asterisk, times 2 by 1080 will give me a long composition. And I'm kind of doing it this way, so, what'd you say? Good point. As Vincent says, make sure that lock aspect ratio is not set, or it'll just double the size of your composition, both directions. So make sure that's unchecked. All right, so for our city, we're just going to do this. I'm going to grab a rectangle, draw all the way along the bottom, and then draw some buildings. Like I said, we're making this really kind of simple and basic, so. We can always go back and add more detail to this later if we want to, but I just want to make it. The one thing I want to make sure that I do whenever I do this is that I want to make sure that each end is identical. So if this thing loops, where it loops is going to match up exactly the same. So that's kind of why I put the long rectangle along the bottom and then just kind of drew the others in. And if you want to get crazy with it and put in windows and that kind of thing, you're welcome to do so. But you don't really need to. But that's going to be our city. Something just simple like that, like we made it out of blocks. And let's make sure that we name our composition. So this is City Skyline. And once we're done with that, actually I want to close out all of these other compositions that I've got. All right. And now I'm going to go create another new composition for my main animation, which is going to be 1920 by 1080. I just always try to make sure things are divisible into each other. I think it works out the best and helps. So 1920 by 1080. And then my city skyline I just made, I'm just going to drop down into that composition. And I think that's kind of high, so I'm just going to sort of slide it down a little bit. And this object we're going to set up so that it loops throughout the entire composition. So the first thing we need to do, once we've dropped this composition into our main, I don't want to get ahead of anybody, is that we're going to apply an offset effect, which is actually going to move the center point of the object, and then we're going to write a looping script. So if you don't, I'm working in a standard workspace, and over here along the right-hand side should be a panel for effects and presets. If we grab that, you see all the different effects that After Effects has in it are here, and I've got a bunch that you probably don't have, but in this search bar, I just want to type the word offset, because what I want to use is the offset effect under the distort category. And select that offset, and drag it right on top of that composition, the city skyline. When we do that, we should get up here with our project panel an effect controls where we can modify our parameters for this effect. I can also do that down here in my timeline. See, it adds the effect section, and I can open that up as well. So, do we have a skyline with an offset effect on it? Yes, no. What's that? So this offset, I'm going to change. So what I want this to do is to start animating from the very beginning. So really all this offset is going to do, the purpose of this particular effect is it's going to move the center point so that it appears as though my skyline is actually moving. So if I change so right now my center is sitting in the middle of this composition at 1920. I'm going to change that to 0. So there's my center point now. And I want to set a keyframe for that. And then if I slide across, I'll go 4 seconds for right now. And I'll go 4 seconds for right now. Then I'm going to change, at 4 seconds, I'm going to change the setting back to 1920. I guess I could have set that keyframe first. So now if I play that, it's going to make the city look as though it's moving. So from the beginning to the end of this, basically it's moving halfway through the composition. And what I want you to notice is that the building that's on the left-hand side of the composition at this point, at the beginning, looks like that. And as I scrub across, you'll see that when I get to the last keyframe, the other half of that same structure is on the far side. So when I loop this, it should line up. We'll see. So I'm going to select that keyframe. Do I need to do the offset thing again? All right, so I want to select this keyframe now, and I want to create that, I want to do a loop again, write a loop script like I did on my other example. So if I select that keyframe, come over here to Shift Center 2, hold down the Option key and click on it, we get, so here's a little difference between what I did before and what I'm going to do now. That effect, I actually need to keep this bit of script that's here because that's actually what's driving the offset effect. So, but I'm still going to write the little offset script that I did before. I'm just going to put it after this. So, if you know anything about writing JavaScript or that kind of thing, usually different commands like this or different lines, you need to separate. And we're going to separate it with a semicolon or a colon. Put a colon in there. And then I'm just going to type my loop out again like I did before. So if I type loop out with the parentheses, my single quote. And then we'll just do cycle. Something. Let's see if that worked. Nope. An error. What did I do? Did I do the wrong thing over here? Loop out. Cycle. So now let's see if that loops the way I think it's going. No, because I am actually going to set my, actually what I'm going to do is not set my center to the middle like I did. Let's see. Set it to the far end and see what we get. Set it to the full length of my composition. There we go. So my skyline scrolls infinitely kind of through my composition. So who created City Skyline? Anybody? The City Skyline? Yeah. So we got City Skyline. Then were you able to do the offset? And the loop? Cool. As long as somebody did. That's the way we can create a looping background behind something so that it seamlessly goes. And so I've got that part. So if I close that up. So in my original composition, I've got a second skyline that I actually moves slower. And I basically just duplicated it and I changed the duration of that overall was the difference. So like if I go back to this, I'm going to duplicate this skyline. So my timeline, Command D. If I open up this loop out, I can actually stretch this time out to say 8 seconds. And maybe on this skyline, I want to set the opacity so that the background shows through a little bit, just to change the color. But I've got a row of buildings behind it that move at a slightly slower pace. I could have created a second skyline as well, just so it was different, but get the idea. So even within, the one thing I didn't do here, even within a long composition like this, when you get to the end, if you make sure that all of your timings are divisible by the overall length of your composition, so if I've got a 30-second composition and I make the speed of the frontmost city 3 seconds, 3 is divisible by 30, right? It means it'll loop 10 times. If I make the speed of the second one, the background city 10 seconds, that's divisible by 30, right? 3 times, that'll loop. So you can make sure that they loop seamlessly too once your composition starts over again, if you want to. But your timings all have to be divisible by the length of your composition, if that makes sense. The other thing that's really kind of nice about this method is you could also create a super long city just to sort of change position on all the way through. But if you want to change, it's easier this way, because if you want to change the height of your buildings or any of that kind of thing, all you got to do is slide them up and down, and you don't have position measurements to worry about. So that's looping our city. I'll grab both of these. Oops. Grab both my skylines. I'm going to slide them up. Place a solid in the background. We've got our red city with our blue sky. And when I did the cloud, it was the same basic way. Create your cloud shape, and using, right in the middle of the composition, except I made it inside of a 1920 by 1080 composition, and you just set the looping points the exact same way that I did with the city. So if I go back here, make a new composition for clouds, and draw little figurative kind of cloud. Make sure that everything's in the middle. And then transform center and view. I can come back in here, drop my cloud into it. and I'll just kind of slide him up. And then with that offset, I'll just go grab that offset effector again, drop it on there, and set our width to, set that to 0. And there's actually the real power of that offset effector, is where you can kind of, this is where you can kind of see what it's actually doing. It's only one cloud in this composition, but it moves it and splits it so that it's exactly divided between the right and the left-hand sides of the composition. So we got that, and so it was 960 originally. So I'm actually going to set my 960 out here at 4 seconds, go back to 0, and set it to 0. And it'll just kind of move through slowly behind my city skylines. Yeah. How do you change the frame? The frame rate? Oh, okay. So you don't actually change the frame rate to do that. You actually just change the duration of the animation. So, like, so let's take this cloud for instance. So right now it's the effect operates over 4 seconds. If I want it to go faster than that, I'm just going to grab my keyframe and pull it in tighter. See, now it moves quicker now. And if I want to move slower, pull it way out, and it'll go real slow. It's actually why, I mean, that reason exactly though is really kind of why this method is good to use and why it's so powerful, because it allows everything to be contained within the actual layer itself. So, and I still got to write the loop out for this cloud. So select that last keyframe, hold down my option key when I click the stopwatch, and loop out, cycle, and let's just pull this in. So I did my loop out wrong. All right, let's do that. Just that. $960, I want this to go to 1920. There we go. So now we've got 3 different layers of animation happening there. Like I said, slow it down by stretching out the position difference between those 2 keyframes. Now it's matching my city, which I don't really want. Slide that out, see what that gives us. it's a little better. All right. And, let's see, all right. But that's looping, I mean, that's how we kind of loop an animation that way. So if in your posters, for instance, you got clouds moving through behind or something like that, that's a simple way of actually making the background image loop so that you don't have to mess around with it for forever in 3 days. So but so there's our different layers. I think I want that cloud to be smaller. Go back into my cloud, selecting, scale them down. And then I'm just going to add a close all these back up. Those work pretty well. And I'll draw just a black roadway along the bottom then. And then in my original composition, I've got this car that kind of motors along, and we just kind of create him the same way that we did the clouds for the most part. So if I create a new composition, 1920 by 1080, again, it's really just, maybe this one will do different. I'll make out of a couple of rectangles. So if I draw a very rough car, let's center our center point to it. Maybe we'll draw, let's make that fill blue. Draw the top of the car. Actually, let's make that look a little more like a car. Or like a pickup truck. Simple little car. And our truck, our wheels. Copy that, paste it. And then, so he's pretty simple. Go back here to our city, drop him in. If we just let him sit still, it looks like he's driving through the city. I picked some really ugly color combinations. But then the bouncing up and down of the cab, the truck or the body of the car is just done by, moving a couple of keyframes up and down and then creating a loop out expression for that as well. So you can do exhaust coming out of a tailpipe the exact same way. I mean, any number of things. But I kind of wanted to do it all just with tools that are in After Effects, just to kind of get used to the working with the tools and drawing with them. Actually, let's do this. All right. Grab my car body, slide it down, position. Then loop out. Cycle. I didn't want a cycle. I wanted ping pong. There. And now when we go back to our city composition and play it, he just kind of bounces along as he drives through the city. Any questions about any of that? It's a kind of a simple little exercise. I mean, it uses the exact same techniques over and over again, but being able to loop elements is, I really can't stress how much that simplifies things when it comes to animating a whole bunch of stuff, So everything, it's just a few effectors and small short movements to do that. So I'm gonna, on Monday, I'm gonna have a short exercise for you guys to do that'll basically use a lot of the things, I mean, looping, basic animation techniques, that kind of stuff. It's, I'll provide you with a file, and you'll just have to animate it to match something. So, but we'll do that on Monday. I didn't bring the file with me today, so. And that'll be one of our smaller in-class exercises. It'll just cover the basics of After Effects. I'll probably do it one time, the basics of it one time through, and then let you guys do it and complete it. So we'll have that on Monday. So, I mean, so far, I mean, I've really kind of covered all the basics of animation, easing, looping, masks, If there's anything in there that you need to see again, ask, because those are, I mean, there's a lot of other things, there's motion tracking and whatnot, but these basic things are sort of the core of everything at After Effects, of most of what we'll do in After Effects. So, if you missed any of it, watch the videos. If you just want to ask to see something again, I'll do that too. That's perfectly fine. So, but